All right, everybody, and welcome to another week of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. This is the weekly show on the E2KG network. It is every other week we're coming at you with a number of episodes related to that week's gaming news. This is our deep dive episode, and on the alternative weeks, we'll be back here with our game experience show as we dive into what we've been playing and the assignments that we have as well. So, last week, if you've been keeping up or if you want to go back into the feed, last week we had assigned ourselves some Game of the Year cleanup. And that is our assignment that we've got to wrap up. This is just a reminder to the rest of the cast that that is your assignment, which is due next week as we approach the end of semester finals. So I'll get out of my professor mode and back into my industry analyst, armchair analyst mode as we dive in to the last 2.5 week and a half or so, 2 weeks of news around the gaming sphere. So, joining me to dive into this news is Agasicles Stamus. How are you, sir? Playing with your mic. All right. And in you almost got it. I can.
Yeah, sorry. It's always hard to find where the blasted mute key is on this headset. I'm good. I'm good. I apologize for running late. I was held up by normal routine Star Citizen bugginess. So
Well, when you pay that much money and that many developers, it only makes sense that you have that many bugs as well. So, but speaking of paying of money, man, this last weekend was the Thanksgiving holiday season here in North America. Kicked off the holiday shopping, which also meant that there was a ton of sales. Sales even still going on. Last night, late in the middle of the night, I messaged Agasicles to ask about Ghost Recon Breakpoint because after all the sales, it was only like maybe $25, $35 at main outlets. And now today on Amazon, after all the Cyber Monday sales are done, it's down to $20, which means they probably have a lot of inventory left if after all of these sales they slash the price even further. But let's not talk about the things that are not selling. Let's talk about what has been selling. And we get some preliminary information. We don't have numbers yet, but we got one story off of CNN Business, which talks about the Nintendo Switch having a really big weekend here in terms of sales. No numbers yet, as the Switch also had a really strong Thanksgiving Black Friday weekend in 2018. Similar bundles again this year with the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe bundle, but also with the new Nintendo Lite as well. So Nintendo Switch Lite dropping in this season as well. So another potential console for people to pick up. But we get some additional news over in the UK from GameIndustry.biz that says that, and they've got some numbers here that the Xbox One actually was the top console seller over there, eking out the Switch by just a few consoles, as the article quotes. But it puts it up over 100,000 units in the UK alone that were sold during retail Black Friday weekend. This would include the multiple sets, the pack-ins and bundles that Xbox One had between multiple SKUs related to the One X, the S, and also the all digital, which was discounted at most places for 150 U.S. retail with some pack-in games as well. I guess, Cleese, I think the Switch doesn't surprise me because we're coming to the end of the console cycle with the Xbox and the PlayStation. People are not. I'm actually kind of more surprised that the Xbox One sold as well because at this point, I would assume people are starting to think about holding off, or they're turning their dollars to the third console that they may not own yet, which would be the Switch at this point.
yeah, so it was pretty interesting news, and some of this stuff just dropped today. Um, Matt Piscatella, which I think we both follow on Twitch and whose opinion I respect a lot, commented that he felt, and granted, I didn't read the article that he was commenting on, and it was a tweet, so it's always difficult to know if you're grasping the full context. But I guess he pinned a tweet responding to an article that he seemed to indicate suggested that the reason that the Switch sold so well was because of waning strength of the Xbox One and the PS4. I'm kind of with you. To me, it's not a matter of, you know, I guess what he was saying was, the Switch is a strong enough seller on its own merit, um, and I would say that that is true, especially now, heading into the holidays. I always think that the Switch, as I did, I took my Switch on Thanksgiving break. It's a kind of thing that, in that week right before you take off for Thanksgiving, or maybe when you're sitting at home, if you travel, um, not your home, but your hometown, um, and you're sitting there and you've got Friday and Saturday and Sunday ahead of you, and maybe a flight. That the Switch seems a natural thing that maybe you dash out and buy as an impulse purchase, right? Um, so so yeah, I'm not surprised by the Switch's numbers. I do think that even if it's not necessarily, um, you know, it's not a gimme. The Switch didn't just walk away with high sales because it is a strong seller on its own, and so it's not solely because of waning strength of the Xbox and PS4. But I agree with you. I mean, 12 months out, less than 12 months out theoretically, from the release of the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Scarlett, maybe that's not the console that you go out and spend a lot of money on. Um, the only people who were probably out buying Xboxes and PlayStations this year are people who aren't concerned and aren't in the pool of consumers who are going to get PS5s or Xbox Scarletts next year. And so they're going out looking for bargains. And they'll be completely satisfied being on last generation's tech when the new consoles come out. There's always that wave of buyers. So,
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, there were some I hounded sales and watched things closely over the weekend. I was up late at night when the clock struck whatever Best Buy's turnover time was to see if there was another glitch this year. So yeah, people out there looking for sales, but some of the Xbox One X bundles with Jedi Fallen Order or NBA 2K20, you could actually find down in the 250 range, depending on when you were looking over the course of the weekend. And so, yeah, I think you're right. Like for somebody who's looking to pick something up that maybe was, knowing what we know about sales numbers, there's still plenty of PlayStation 4 owners out there that could pick up a Xbox and catch up on some, especially and now maybe with Game Pass Ultimate being the value that it is in terms of the back catalog, it's a relatively easy pickup for somebody to catch up on a generation in this meantime before the next one launches.
yeah, one of the things that I found most interesting is, and it's not my headline, but I forget what site ran it, but some right ran the headline, not so sad anymore. Throwing shade at all the people who had called the Xbox One S All Digital Edition this Xbox One sad, because it
That's
was one
right.
of the strong sellers over this
Hmm.
weekend, and it makes sense. I think a lot of times when and we're guilty of it. I'm probably guilty of it. A lot of times when analysts or journalists or whatever cover this stuff, we look at it through the lens of our generation, and our generation is still stocked pretty full of a demographic of people who insist upon holding on to physical things and having their game boxes or whatever up on shelves and that type of thing. 20 something year olds don't care about that stuff. They don't need to have the stuff up on a shelf. They're very happy going to a computer or pulling up on their phone and seeing all those album cover thumbnails rendered digitally. So they are completely comfortable with the notion of an Xbox One S all digital edition. And if you kind of understand and know and believe that that's the direction that everything is headed anyway, then again, why would you spend money collecting physical media that you're just going to have to get rid of? So I expect that the Xbox One. It's not surprising that the Xbox One S all digital sold well. I expect that trend to just continue to increase as time goes on.
And I think you make a good point there in terms of who that demographic is for the all digital, right? That this is not somebody who's picking up 4K Blu-ray disc that is looking for another drive. This is a streaming generation. This is the digital. I'm not going to say digital generation because that's been used for 4 different generations at this point. But I
Right.
mean, I think it is, and it's also the thing I think is really key here is that the price point for a teenager, for a 20 something with a job or even a little bit of disposable income, picking something up for $150 is very much in the realm of, oh, well, we may have the family has one or, my older brother has one, but now I get one in my room, right? This
Right.
is an easy pickup.
And
So,
I and I and I think that influence across demographics will continue to increase and balloon. You mentioned Blu-rays, and I think I've mentioned to you guys as it is. Like I love movies. I, I have to write a task on a list to force myself to think about buying a Blu-ray because the convenience of just going into the Amazon app on my phone, or in any other digital storefront and just buying a movie with my fingers rather than physically arranging to have it shipped and blah 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 is hard. Um, as we've seen on PC, it's incredibly easy, sometimes addictively and predatorially so, to pop open the Steam application client on your desktop and just buy a game rather than thinking, on the way home from work today, I got to go by GameStop. It's like, so I mean, those things, like I said, will, are impacting that generation, but will also continue to, I think, outgrow and hit older generations as we continue on as well.
yeah, well, let's keep on the target topic of sales. And right before the holidays, we had the news story coming out of EA that Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order has broken multiple sales records for EA. So this is good news for the game in terms of selling strongly. I think the piece that I want to lead off before I toss it to you is the language in the press release, right? That this is the fastest selling EA Star Wars title. Over the first 2 weeks, it has sold more digital downloads than any Star Wars game. Okay. And it's also the fastest selling PC title for EA, PC Star Wars, of any of its Star Wars games. So all of that language, right? I mean, I think it's selling well. That's good news. I think the bundles of Xbox that it's selling with are probably good news for Xbox as well. The fact that it's couched in this language, that we're only really talking about 3 Star Wars games of Battlefront 2, which was mired in controversy, and this game, I think is, I guess you could make the case that Battlefront 1 launched strongly at a time when Force Awakens was just coming out and Star Wars hype was strong. So it's a good sign. But I mean, thoughts here? I mean, is this
Is this? I mean, you're in the education, in the academic realm. Is this what caveat emptor means? Probably not, but it's definitely a babushka doll of caveats.
yes,
Caveat
it's a
inside
lot
a
of
caveat.
asterisks in along with it. Yep.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So I mean, what it adds up to is it dilutes the impact that any one of these statements might have when you consider that its relativity to the terms that are muddled in there makes it kind of not that big a deal. Um, I mean, it's the best PC launch of any of its Star Wars games. Um, what I expect is I feel like, and this is said through the lens of somebody being in the streaming community, is that more and more people are getting into PCs and gaming on PCs. Those numbers are growing. People who in the past I don't think would have been PC gamers are becoming PC gamers, and so it makes sense that a AAA title like this, which has a high degree of visibility and ad awareness. I mean, if anything, this is a victory for the marketing department. I think more than anything, and just getting the word out and making sure that people were aware of it. Tons of hype for the movie coming out, etc.
So let's
Um,
throw another wrinkle in there, though.
yeah,
The ad. I appreciate the praise for the ad department. I think they advertised well. It was good. This was, coming off of the debacle of Battlefront 2. that they leaned heavily in the story aspect. I think you're exactly right on that. The piece here that is not said within the press release is this is also the first PC Star Wars game that is on Steam as well.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. And in an era that, let's see, I mean, so Battlefront 2 launched.
17?
So there, I don't think their EA Origin subscription service
No.
was turned on then, right? So, I mean, I'm sure that those numbers are muddled and mixed in here. So
Oh
you have
yeah,
a
that's
ton of
true.
people who are subscribers who just automatically got the game. I mean,
Yep, I'm
Xbox
one of
counts
them.
those as sales,
Yeah.
you know, or whatever. So, yeah. So
Yep. So for those
knows
listening at
no
home,
wonder.
caveat emptor is a buyer beware. So I always want to say it in the Marcus Munitions voice from Borderlands. So
Yeah, I think the dialogue on this is actually. I mean, so there's two ways that a game can do well, right? It can, gain great critical acclaim, um, and it can sell well. Um, so it has theoretically, maybe, I guess, maybe sold well. I mean, I think given the press release, we can assume that EA will feel comfortable green lighting and funding a Fallen Order 2, is
yep,
what this drumbeat sounds like to me. I think what's maybe even more impactful when it comes to Fallen Order is the discussion that we're going to have around the Game of the Year um, uh, Game Awards Show nominees.
sure,
But I will
sure.
hold my tongue
Okay, well,
until then.
let's finish up the news before we get to that point. So, one other piece of news as I sit behind me with my PSVR headset is that we get a little bit of Phil Spencer quote from right before Thanksgiving related to the Xbox Scarlett not having VR support. Um, this has been spun lots of different ways from commenters. Really, basically, the quote here is that the it's not the focus. That I think it's a fine thing to say. I think the piece where people feel like there might be a little shade thrown is that where the kind of additional commentary about we're listening to what our audience wants and no one is asking for it. Is part of some of the commentary around it. But again, I don't think that it is an unreasonable statement for Phil Spencer to get out and to say that there was some speculation with this generation's Xbox and its potential integration with something like Vive or Oculus, and but again, the market is still a fraction of what the console market. So you own and have participated on VR podcasts as well with Greylock. Any surprises here, or more about just kind of heading things off of the past, get some of the news out of the way, and before a holiday, so that they can move on to talk about good things like what we were talking about in terms of sales.
I think it's no secret that I'm a big fan of Phil Spencer's. I'm still waiting on him to announce his run in the 2020 campaign. I would fully support him for that. Um, so this isn't a surprise. And I was one of those people that was beating the drum. As we're coming around the corner, approaching the first Xbox Scarlett announcement, um, or even really the Scorpio announcement, um, given how much Microsoft had doubled down on support for Windows Mixed Reality when all of the PC vendors and manufacturers built out those inexpensive headsets.
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of people, during days, and I mean, VR is still expensive. I mean, I was having a conversation with a fellow streamer and her sister last weekend, and they were in the hunt, or actually over the Thanksgiving holiday, and they were in the hunt for a Vive Pro, which is a headset from 2018 and isn't even the latest tech. And to get that kit with all of its necessary accoutrements, I mean, is a $1,000 kit. Valve Index is a $1,000 endeavor. The Vive Cosmos, which is the current tech, is still a $599 headset, and I believe the Rift S is also. These are not inexpensive things. The other thing is you need a pretty doggone powerful PC to run it, and even when you have it, it's relatively unstable. Um, I walked back from having designated VR gaming time in kind of my monthly gaming schedule because of its lack of reliability and overall system availability whenever I did want to do VR. This so this is there was a there was a time when I was disappointed by the Scorpio not supporting those Windows mixed reality headsets because I felt like that was such a natural move. Um, I too, I guess, maybe have lost a little bit of my fervor for VR, and so this does not disappoint me. Um, as is the case with everything in gaming that, in my opinion, is not core. Um, Heading down the path of these endeavors is always dangerous. Um, people. I mean, the motion controllers, right? All the goofy stuff that has been tried.
Right? And think
Since
about how many times I mean, Xbox has been burned on that with this
the
last generation.
Kinect.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
Right. And the Kinect, in my opinion, was a relatively good product. I mean, it pushed
Hmm.
the boundaries of some things. I miss having voice control for my Kinect. It's interesting that now you can have it with the Amazon Echo, which I haven't even tried. Um, but but Microsoft pivoted in that strategy and was like, hey, if somebody else does a thing better than we do, we may as well just integrate with that thing than do our own. So this there's a very small sliver of me still that's a little bit disappointed in this because I believe from a technological standpoint it's feasible. I completely agree with Phil Spencer in saying that I don't hear Xbox gamers like when I was saying of course Microsoft is going to integrate these Windows mixed reality headsets with Scorpio. There weren't a ton of other people saying it and nobody was clamoring for it.
Hmm.
Um, Again, the core demographic of the Xbox are your core gamers, right? Halo people, Forza people, racing games, fighting games, first person shooters. And those people are not super wrapped around the axle about VR, I don't think. Um,
Yeah, I
and
think. I
again,
mean, go ahead.
well, and in a day where people just aren't trying to spend $1,000, to game.
Yep, I think that's a key point here too. Is that it helps. It should potentially help them focus their specs on kind of the core aspects that you're talking about, without having to make sure that they support not only VR but AR or whatever else. It gives them, because they're coming from a place of behind, and so it makes sense that they're going to want to try to narrow that scope and focus it in to hit both their consumer targets but also their price targets as well. So let's move on to what you alluded to, and dive into the Game Awards. So this is the Jeff Keighley hosted, formerly Spike TV, and multiple other iterations. That this is the show is actually coming up next week on December 12th. I believe that is the day. Yes, on a Thursday. It's usually on a Thursday, but we got the award, or the nominees, right before the week before Thanksgiving, and so as we here on the ETKG network are starting to talk about our game of the year superlatives, categories, and all the other games that we recognize this year, we also want to take some time here in the news cycle to talk about what's getting covered within the Game Award nominees as well. So, Agasicles, we've got time. We could certainly go through each of these categories and talk about some of the ones that stand out to us. But I think maybe, why don't you? I'm going to toss this to you first and say, out of the big category, Game of the Year: Control, Death Standing, Resident Evil 2, Sekiro, and Smash, and The Outer Worlds. Any surprises there?
I guess my big surprise is that this list to me is incredibly disappointing. Like I don't feel like I know a lot of people don't agree with it. I'm a Metacritic guy, right? I'm a data analytics guy. I believe in numbers. I believe in aggregated metrics. Those things make sense to me. Control was not a 90% game, right? I mean, neither on Metacritic nor in my own opinion. It's a solid game. I mean, my favorite game of all time, Max Payne, I don't think is an A game, right? It's a Max Payne is a mid B to high B. It speaks to me as a gamer. I loved it. Control is very much the same way. Um, Resident Evil 2, I don't know that I can get on board with the concept of a remake, even a modernization remake. Competing for Game of the Year, like, and being one of the top 6 games. Um, and I played Resident Evil 2. It's good. The only thing it really changes from its original is the change in locomotion, right? I mean, but otherwise it's basically the same game. It's got some new mechanics to it, but I don't know that that qualifies as a quantum leap or bound over what it was originally was. I didn't play Sekiro. I'd love to hear Swiss's opinion on it from a wide 10,000 foot view. It's a Souls game essentially, which inherently means it's got a niche audience. Um, Smash, while Smash is great in terms of volume of characters, I don't know that Smash really does anything super innovative from a design perspective than just be the best Smash it can be. Outer Worlds, I didn't play. Um, you know, Outer Worlds is, from everything that I've heard and understood, is it it hews very close to the original Fallout DNA from which it comes, and doesn't really take that much further. It puts it in a different skin. It's Obsidian's own thing from the ground up, but essentially in terms of scope and scale, it's relatively equivalent. Um, and Death Stranding, while I mean I can see that it is a great artistic and theatrical feat. Um, I don't. First of all, I don't know that it's an artistic and theatrical feat that exceeds anything that's come before. I think it's great, but I think Detroit Become Human, Heavy Rain, all these things that Quantic Dream has done, even Red Dead Redemption 2 to a certain degree
Mhm.
with its degree of theatricality. Um, it's a weird kind of artsy thing because it's a Kojima thing. It has some definitive themes to it, but I don't know that it, like, if I isolate on the movie aspect of Death Stranding, I don't know that it's the best movie within a game that's ever been done. So this is just a really, there's no 800-pound gorillas in this field, in my
Sure,
opinion.
right. And I would say I would agree with a lot of what you're saying. So I've had a chance to play Control, haven't played Death Stranding. I picked up Resident Evil 2 over the holiday weekend here for $15. I've played a little bit of Sekiro this weekend to give it some try, which was part of our gaming assignment in terms of going back to some of those games. Smash, I've certainly played enough of, and Outer Worlds, I've been playing, but also kind of falling away from because it is, as you said, kind of samey. I mean, it does what it does well, but it's not that innovative in what it's doing. Um, it, it is so. I think I'm gonna 2 points here that you bring up, which I think are spot on. Is some of these are better off in a certain category, right? Like some of art direction, Control is nominated down there. That makes a whole lot more sense. It's a solid game, but it's got really strong art direction. Graphic performance, right? Death Stranding, some of the character motion capture pieces, really strong there. Um, the other piece that you mentioned in terms of the 800-pound gorilla is that this is the end of the year. I mean, this is the end of the console cycle. Sometimes we get some really heavy hitters in here that have taken a while to kind of come to fruition, but we also kind of got that last year. But last year we had two big heavy hitters with God of War and Red Dead Redemption that kind of, I don't know, in some ways pushed gaming with Red Dead Redemption, and in some ways just really polished it up pretty with God of War. Uh, and I don't know if that's necessarily the case in what we see in the games that are listed here for Game of the Year. Again, all strong games, but and I don't know that we need to kind of posit what some alternatives may be because that's what our own Game of the Year is for. But I think your points are well made that having a remake in Resident Evil 2 up in Game of the Year speaks to maybe how maybe not as strong of a year as it could be if that's the case.
Well, I'm looking at the 2018 nominees, right? And this to me is the thing. I mean, I almost feel that in almost every case, any one of these six games from 2018 come through here and slobber knock any of these other nominees for 2019, right? God of War, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, just in terms again
Mhm.
in scope and scale, but again even in terms of like dialogue and story, and I know that story kind of I mean from a character development standpoint, I think it would be incredibly strong. Celeste, Spider-Man, Monster Hunter World, Red Dead Redemption 2. I mean, in God of War, Spider-Man, Monster Hunter World, and Red Dead Redemption, you have four games that achieved things in culminating game design that many gamers felt were groundbreaking, right? Not necessarily super innovative, but in some cases they were. Like the axe in God of War, finally gave people the opportunity to feel like they were wielding Mjolnir, right?
Hmm.
And even though it was basically kind of the reality is it was a Mjolnir clone, right, from a mythological standpoint, it was an awesome game mechanic. Spider-Man, just in terms of not new, but the web slinging in that, and swinging around New York City, just refined that formula to be the best it ever could be. Monster Hunter World was, while I don't agree with it, I was still outside the threshold of the velvet rope on that myself. Still, it implemented a design that allowed a lot of people who had never been able to participate in the Monster Hunter mythology to finally cross that line. And Red Dead Redemption 2, right? And then double that when you see it now on PC. It just seems like a much stronger field last year. And I'm not ready to go down the road of like the negative Nellies who were saying, this was a weak year in gaming. Um, but I'm just not overly super impressed by this field of GOTY nominees.
Well, I would say let's take that line of reasoning in terms of either really polishing something up and mastering some gameplay designs, or trying something new. That I would put Sekiro and Smash Ultimate in that kind of really polishing up and mastering game design of what they are. Right. That as a Souls game, Sekiro is probably the most accessible, and it is also something that is not as not only obtuse, but it's polished up in terms of graphics and bugs and other pieces there. Smash Ultimate is a really polished Smash game, like you said, but again, it is just a Smash game. So looking at this list, really the only one that feels, Control, I think is innovative in a game space, but it still feels like I've seen it done in other media, and I enjoy it. Don't get me wrong, I love the X Files, right? But it's not anything that is new in terms of narrative pieces for as divisive in Metacritic as Death Stranding is, I think you can make a case that it does try to be something different. That it is doing something different with design, with mechanics. It may be obtuse at times and confusing in true Kojima fashion, but I think you could make a case that at least it is pushing boundaries in a way that Resident Evil 2 doesn't necessarily push boundaries.
Yeah, yeah, and I definitely feel. I mean, I don't mean it to say that none of these titles are impressive. I am incredibly happy that Death Stranding exists for what it is, for what it does, for what it says about um, creative direction in games. From what it says in terms of enabling, a personality like Kojima's as a creator to in the movie equivalent to me of Kojima is like a James Cameron, maybe a George Lucas even to a certain extent. It's somebody who has a vision for a thing that no one other than that person could see it in their mind's eye, and herding and corralling everyone to stitch a thing together to actually then make that vision tangible and share that out to the world is an incredible thing, in terms of the way it's done in Death Stranding. Um, I probably think from that aspect, this is probably the strongest. I mean, Death Stranding to me. I mean, again, I elected not to play it. I would probably, if I had to, give Death Stranding in this field the nod for GOTY. And and, and I don't. Again, I don't feel. I don't personally feel Control is an A+ game. I like Remedy as a studio. I like 505 Games as a publisher. I enjoy the game Control. It's the game Control to me is a very Agasicles game, um, but uh, but I don't know that it's a game that widely appeals to tons of gamers,
Sure.
particularly not in these days and times.
No, I agree with you. I really enjoyed Control and still enjoy it. I just started to go back to it again based on our assignment. But let's jump down here into a couple other categories. Let's skip over some of the typical genre ones and let's dive into community support. So, the kind of ongoing game, the community support piece, Apex Legends, Destiny 2, Final Fantasy 14, Fortnite, and Rainbow Six
Oof.
Siege. Right? I mean, in some ways, that this feels like here are games that have impacted, well, at least many of them have impacted the landscape, the industry this year in some ways more so than the Game of the Year aspect.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I mean, the sad reality of it is the impact of this category is that the people who play in this lane most of their time are the reason those people haven't been able to pay attention to any of the games that are in the Game of the Year category, right?
Mm-hmm.
These players will know about Death Stranding from maybe having heard it. Um, they probably won't even know about Control, and so on and so forth. And this is a tough one to call. Like, man, Apex Legends gets kudos for the shadow drop just coming out of nowhere with a right hook and shocking everyone. Um, Destiny 2 to me is maybe the most polished amongst this field in terms of what it's done, um, and maybe the boldest in terms of the character of the development team in separating out from Activision,
Sure, right. That happened
take
this year. Yeah.
yeah, taking control of the game, driving it in a direction that they wanted um, to. I really honestly can't comment on Final Fantasy 14. It's interesting that it's a thing and it's sustainable. Um,
But it got big press and a boost in numbers with Shadowbringer. I mean, it was pulling people off of WoW. I mean, it's that piece has been successful for them.
right. Fortnite. I mean, here's what I think about Fortnite, and it's I'm gonna. This is dangerous for me because I'm firmly in that group of we constantly try and police ourselves for and watch ourselves about heaping praise upon games that impacted us highly in Q4. Right before our superlatives discussion, and not giving as much thrift to games that came earlier. But I took off on Thanksgiving break. I had Fortnite loaded on my iPad, on my Razer Phone 2, and on my Switch. And literally, I rolled into solo matches, and I played on my iPad till it ran out of batteries. I switched over to my Razer Phone 2, and then I switched over, and there were lots of times during those nights I was like, I just need to put this down. Like I had to force myself to walk away from it. Epic, and I know that the pro players, like, and the people who take it seriously don't like it. Epic does a great job of making Fortnite accessible and being able to onboard in that game in relatively short order despite its complexity. And we talked a couple of weeks ago about how despite that veneer of clarity, there's still a lot of deep strategy to how you play a given match of Fortnite. Um, and Rainbow Six, you when you asked me about Ghost Recon Breakpoint, that was the thing I kind of threw back at you, which is, I'm never gonna bet against Ubisoft, right? Like
Yeah,
time
their
and
long
time
development
again.
cycle. Yep, they come
Yeah,
back and support something.
I mean, Rainbow Six's Siege is a game that should have been in the crapper in its first year of launch, and they have slowly willed that thing back into becoming, one of the clear kings of this particular area. I think it still has some problems, and I quite honestly I feel like it's the weakest player in this category, because I feel out of all of these, the design orientation of that game forces it to be niche, right?
Sure.
Like Final Fantasy 14 is niche because of its content and maybe because of its art style and graphical style. It's going to only speak to a limited demo. But Rainbow Six Siege has a bar that a lot of people can't climb over, and even more people just don't have any interest in climbing over.
Sure. Yep, I could see that. The entry barrier there is much higher.
Yeah.
Yep. So let's jump down to independent game. Last year we had, as you said, Celeste won the independent game category, but was also nominated in the overall game of the year. This year we don't have that, so our independent game nominees are Untitled Goose Game, Outer Wilds, the drop from June, Katana Zero from Devolver Digital, Disco Elysium, and the puzzle game Baba Is You. These feel like, yeah, in terms of indie games that the press has covered and I've heard hype and good praise about, these feel pretty accurate.
Yeah, and this is probably the one category that I'm the least equipped to talk through. The only game that I've played in this field is Disco Elysium, which is a game that I see its positives, but I also you know see there are vectors that it's on that again are only going to appeal to a very small
Yep,
niche
the
of
niche
gamer.
aspect of that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Here I'm pleased to see Katana Zero, Devolver Digital. It's one of those from earlier in the Q1 that gets some love, along with Baba Is You in Q1. So let's jump down.
So just before
Yeah.
we leave this, are any of these games on Switch?
Yes.
Okay.
So I own Katana Zero on Switch. I
Okay.
picked it up.
All right.
It's still on sale right now, but it was like $7. But I picked it up over E3. Baba Is You is on Switch. It launched on Switch and PC. Same with Untitled Goose Game, where it launched on Switch and PC. Outer Wilds at this point is now on PlayStation 4 along with Xbox. I think it's come also to PC, but it started as a Game Pass game in June when it dropped. And
Okay.
Disco Elysium is scheduled to come to all three consoles in early 2020.
Oh wow. Okay.
So let's stay on the Switch end of the spectrum and let's look at the mobile game category here quickly, um, because it's dominated by Apple Arcade games, with Grindstone, the puzzle game by Capybara Games, Senor Sayonara Wild Hearts by Annapurna, What the Gulf by Triban. All three of those are Apple Arcade game exclusives, at least to mobile. Then you get Sky, the Children of Light by that game company, the Journey people, and then you get Call of Duty Mobile. So uh, I think it's an interesting cross section that cuts across a number of different genres. I find it interesting that Call of Duty Mobile hits in there at the same time you get something artsy like Sky and Sayonara. Um, but the fact that Apple Arcade uh, has such a big footprint here, I think, is meaningful, or at least opens a window for continued uh, publisher development within that Apple Arcade space as well. So, and you've played a little bit of Apple Arcade over the holiday break as well. Is that correct? Did you get a chance to try any of these three games, or what did you pick up on Apple Arcade?
No, I didn't. I wish my iPad was in reach. I think part of the problem is so I play games on iPad as well as Apple Arcade. And so I had Apple Arcade games, but I also have been going through various short lists of like the best controller supported games um,
Mm-hmm.
on iPad because the whole point of me playing these games is to try and get as close as I can to a console experience. And so I'm trying to not. I'm not interested in playing too much of anything that has touch controls. I didn't play any of these. I think the Apple Arcade game that I played was a Sociable Soccer,
Mm-hmm.
which I was very impressed by. It's in that vein of FIFA, but it I hate to say that it waters things down or dumbs things down or abstracts a few concepts more easily. But in that game, I'm not like spending hours and sweating bullets, like managing my team lineup and formations and all that kind of stuff. It's just get on the grass and play a game of soccer kind of game. And I'm really impressed from that aspect.
Yeah, that's a
So yeah,
relatively newer release on Apple Arcade. Was that soccer game? There's
yes,
also a baseball game out there now, as
right,
well, a multiplayer baseball game.
yep,
So let's jump down since you're here. Before I turn over and the categories to you to see if you have anything for follow up, I want your opinion on the strategy game list. Since we are talking to you, Agasicles. So the strategy game list is Age of Wonders, Planetfall,
okay,
Anno 1800, Fire Emblem Three Houses, Total War Three Kingdoms, Tropico 6, and Wargroove. That's the Chucklefish kind of Advance Wars like game.
all right, yeah.
Any
So
thoughts here? You've got pretty good experience on a couple of these.
yeah, so I've played half of these titles. I've played Age of Wonders, Planetfall, Fire Emblem Three Houses, and Total War Three Kingdoms. I really like Planetfall, but it doesn't have as much of a hook in its uniqueness or its particular shtick that appeals to me as much as Fire Emblem Three Houses or Total War Three Kingdoms. Um, yeah, again, this is going to be tough. Fire Emblem Three Houses, I probably, if I had to give a nod to any of these three, I'd probably give it to Fire Emblem Three Houses. The um, Harry Potter kind of type gameplay in the game, I think, is pretty significant. I sometimes while playing it got a little weary that it wasn't. I wasn't spending as much time in the strategic and tactical modes of the game. There's a lot of relationship building. Um, spending time kind of cultivating your team,
Mm-hmm.
exploring relationships, that kind of thing. Um, but in terms of if this were a real fiction, that's what a lot of coaching and leading and building teams is. It's a lot of what how and when and where you spend time interacting with people off the field. Um,
Sure. I
and
would say those mechanics are part of the strategy because you do
yeah,
have a limited number of turns, of days. So depending on if you're going to try to build somebody's weapon proficiency up,
right,
that those are strategic choices. It's
yeah,
kind of
absolutely.
wrapped in a narrative.
And it gives each it gives any given playthrough an entire flavor of complete uniqueness. Um, and a sense of ownership. I mean, at the end of the day, when you do deploy to the battlefield, that team is yours. Um, and so that aspect, and the fact that to me, those game design elements came like completely out of nowhere. That was not what I was expecting when I bought that game. Makes me probably appreciate it more so than the others. Total War Three Kingdoms, I really enjoyed. It's a game I want to get back to and spend some time. I experienced a little friction simply and this is not the game's fault. It's probably more my fault in terms of my Pavlovian, um, perspective. Is they moved a lot of things around, and so I lost a lot of time playing the game expecting certain mechanics and certain UI elements and UX components to be in the same place or to play the same way. And in some cases, they felt like some of those changes were kind of arbitrary and not clearly conveyed either. So um, it's a wonderful game and it's a beautiful game. It was a bit of system shock and friction when I first encountered it, but um, yeah, these are very interesting titles. I think the most important thing to me in terms of the strategy game genre this year is that it's back, full force. All of these games reviewed really well. All of these games, as far as I know, sold decently. Um, I saw a lot more people picking up Planetfall than I would have expected.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
a lot of awareness about Three Houses, a lot more awareness of Three Houses than I would have expected, which I think comes from the number of people who bought Switches who maybe have not been historical Nintendo fans. Um,
I think your point back in the beginning of this segment related to Metacritic pieces that both Three Houses and Total War Three Kingdoms were strong Metacritic games as well. Yeah. Any other categories or nominees, either things that make it onto the list that surprise you or things that are not included here that you want to give a shout out to uh, before we wrap up this segment?
I guess one of the things is I also feel overall, and we'll have to see how the Game Awards show goes. One of the things I felt like is that this year was a very strong year, surprisingly so, for driving games, um, and so I was really surprised. It's really unfortunate that they combined the sports and racing game genres into one category. I feel Dirt Rally 2.0 was incredibly strong and groundbreaking in some aspects. F1 2019 was just the whole approach to that game is starkly different, and it's really unfortunate that enough people aren't into driving games because it actually has story-driven and character development elements in it,
Wow, nice.
which I think are incredibly appealing. And the technical fidelity with which it plays on Xbox to me um, was amazing. Um, both of these games, both of these games are made by Codemasters. So, um,
Yep.
again, this is not a huge develop. This is not a Destiny 2 size development team. They cranked out two AAA racing games with high simulation technical fidelity that really requires you to play these games with wheel and pedals to get all the value out of them. And they cranked both of them out in a year. F1 2019 is on a yearly development cycle. They put this thing out every year. Dirt Rally isn't too far behind. They're probably on a. They might be on. They're not on a full 2 years. I think they're on something like an 18-month dev cycle. So, um, again, really impressive and unfortunate that it's. I feel like it's going to kind of be buried here. And then on top of that, the news story of Codemasters buying I forget the name of the company, but I think it's I think they bought the Project Cars um,
Wow.
guys.
Really? Okay.
Yes, yeah. So they picked up short of the first party studios that make great racing games. They picked up you know the one other like independent
Yep.
development studio making racing games.
Well, and Codemasters also had a subgroup, a sub team in there who did the Onrush game last year, so more of the arcadey racer
Yeah.
as well. So
Yeah, and yes,
definitely
that's it. They bought Slightly Mad Studios, who are the Project Cars guys.
nice. Yeah, that's good that they found a home then.
Yep.
Good. Excellent. Well, yeah, I think you're right. Let's see how these turn out. But it's a nice segue for us as we turn the E2KG network to our game of the year and game experiences of the year as well. Next week, we will be back on Tuesday evening with our final game experience show of the year. We will be talking about kind of wrapping things up, any assignments in terms of catch up games and what we've been playing over the holiday weekend. And then coming in on the week before the Christmas season, the Christmas holiday, we will have a a two-parter in terms of our game superlative shows, as we're going to dive into a number of both games and game experiences. So again, these we get some things that are going to be similar to what we talked about tonight in terms of game that we think will get mainstream press coverage for Game of the Year. But we also dive into some things that are a little more us as well in terms of family game night or game to play when you're sick or game that you wish you played more of. Because we know as adults with jobs and families that we don't always get the chance to play as much as we want to. But we always keep trying, we keep playing, we keep enjoying what we do in the community that we. So glad that we were here tonight at Agasicles to have this conversation. Any other final thoughts in the wrap up before we head out for the evening?
No, that's pretty much it. We got a lot of rest and a lot of planning to do for the remaining shows. So I'm fine if we put this episode to rest.
All right. Well, again, stick with us. Come back. Join us on the E2KG network. Join us on YouTube, on Twitter. Follow Agasicles on his multiple streaming endeavors and the number of other people here on the E2KG network. So, for myself, DBqHams and Agasicles, have a good evening, everyone. Enjoy those games. Get ready for some controversy as the game of the years come. But remember to play what you like, no matter what list it makes it onto, as long as it's on your list. That's what matters. Good night.